Of all the magical beings in the world, few are as cunning and malefact as the witch. Despite being like an ordinary human being in every way and shape, the witch is an individual that possesses an innate sense of and gift with magic. This power of witches sets them apart from other people in a very concerning way. Predominantly a solitary female, witches can be both young, enchanting and alluring, as well as old, crony and even ugly. However, these appearances belie their true nature as a dangerous and enigmatic wielder of arts that no man can comprehend. The powers of witches are plural. They can cast simple spells, hexes and curses. They can raise the dead and may even control nature itself. Indeed, their powers seem almost limitless. It is for this reason that they are often maligned and even hunted by those who rightfully fear their powers. It is all too common to hear of someone who has lost everything due to the actions of witches. Wealth, power, beauty, and even humanity. All these and more may be stolen or granted by a witch intent on bending others to their will. Witches have strong relationships with otherworldly beings such as demons. These demons often act in the service of the witches or grant them additional powers and favors. In fact, it is often debated as to whether the witch's own gifts with magic are innate at all. Many people believe that it is through such compacts with these creatures that the witch is granted her powers in the first place. Naturally, this is concerning in and of itself, as consorting with demons always leads to dire outcomes. This consortion often goes hand in hand with the performance of prolonged and unseemly rituals, where the witch will often dance nude by moonlight, breaking taboos in order to invoke the spirits that are otherwise sealed away by following such moral practices. A final common practice of the witch is found in the creation of potions and poultices. These are often created from plants and other natural materials. By using her otherworldly knowledge, the witch is able to identify and predict the outcomes of such concoctions, and will often sell them to people who unwisely require their assistance. Despite this generally negative outlook on witches, there are those who act in the service of mankind. However, their aid is often sought at a price. Often known as white witches, these women are possessed of good intent, but due to the fact that their power comes from the same source as those with ill intent, they must meet the same requirements to render their magical services. Thus, demons and sacrifices of various kinds abound, despite their benign goals. Due to the danger these people pose to the fabric of society, people will often participate in witch hunts to rid themselves of these dangerous people. Whole towns and villages have often been set against such individuals. The irony of reliance upon witches, despite fear and hatred of them, has never fully been considered. Perhaps it is the self-same reliance that will ensure that witches are never truly eradicated, and it is not unreasonable that someone could spontaneously become a witch. Our mothers, sisters, and daughters all are potentially hiding a dark secret just under our noses. Witches and witchcraft have existed all over the world since time immemorial, from ancient Hebrew kashaf, or the witch doctors of Bantu Africa, and even modern Wiccan witches. There are many similarities across these various conceptions of the witch. It is quite surprising to see how ubiquitous this belief is. Across all of these cultures, witches are able to cast spells and affect the fates of whomever they so desire. Especially curious is the fact that, although many cultures do not have a concept of a demon as such, witches are the world over nevertheless in contact with all manner of supernatural beings. Our relationship with witches has always been tense, and they are often treated as a necessary evil in history. This can be demonstrated as far back as ancient Mesopotamia, where the law code of Hammurabi actually details the punishments involved in conducting witchcraft. However, later beliefs in that region, particularly Abrahamic religions, would later come to completely vilify witches and various practices associated with it, such as divination. A very interesting contrast considering the relative fairness with which it was treated in previous ages. Later, this rejection of witchcraft would lead to witch hunts in Europe and the Americas. This was an activity whereby people who were often falsely accused of being witches were burned or, more often, hung by legal enforcers or by small polities depending on the circumstances. Of course, these witch hunts did mask a more sinister goal, namely political and social expedience. By accusing people of being witches, governments in the past were able to find blame for their own failings, and people were able to rid themselves of rivals. These regrettable activities have been explored in many academic and narrative publications, the most famous of which is The Crucible by Arthur Miller. In combination with works such as The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, these serve as an in-depth and detailed look into the motives that compel such heinous activities. Besides the ills affecting Western culture, the witch is treated rather differently in cultures around the world. Quite often, in African cultures, witches form an integral part of the social hierarchy. Due to the size of Africa, it is difficult to detail exactly how particular cultures interacted with witches. The roles these individuals play can be broadly summarized as providing medical as well as supernatural treatment to people's problems, ergo the witch doctor name. Interestingly, witches in Africa are mostly male as opposed to the more female variant in Western culture. Of course, with the spread of Christianity in Africa, the relationship with witches and the people of Africa has become more antagonistic than before, and the role of the witch has shrunk with time. Nevertheless, there is still a business niche for the witches, and small businesses offering the services of those individuals can be found throughout most of sub-Saharan Africa. Asia has not escaped the antagonism towards witches, and even in modern times, women from India to China have been mistreated on the basis of supposedly being witches. Once more, the powers of the witch throughout Asia are quite similar to those of witches in the rest of the world. Asian cultures are particularly superstitious. Thus, industries related to certain aspects of witchcraft, such as potions, are able to thrive in the modern world. These superstitions, while not inherently negative, do have side effects that are less than palatable. For example, the desire to exploit magical properties of rhino horn has seen the majority of rhino poaching done in the service of so-called traditional medicine in China. To its credit, the Chinese government has recently made attempts to diminish these activities, but cultural change is a slow process. Linguistically speaking, the word witch has been applied to these magically potent individuals retroactively. Consequently, these conceptions of what makes a witch might vary from place to place, and culture to culture. Indeed, even across time, the witch has changed dramatically from its original inception, where modern Western witches no longer resemble the witches of yore. This information is important to understand the relationship between the various cultures and witches, where cultures influenced by Abrahamic religions have a more antagonistic relationship with witchcraft than other cultures. Thus, when European culture spread to the rest of the world, magical practitioners were called witches regardless of the cultural relationship with or nuance of the social role. Ironically, despite its history with witchcraft, we have seen within Western culture a modern revival of witchcraft in the form of the Wiccan religion. Created in 20th century England, the Wiccan religion is a decentralized duotheistic revivification of the ancient European pagan traditions, and has diversified into numerous variations from the core tenets broadly established by the religion's founder, Gerald Gardner. While not technically witchcraft, Wiccan beliefs do incorporate aspects of pagan traditions that have been deemed heretical by the Christian Church during the Middle Ages. Consequently, this particular religion has been intentionally and unintentionally conflated with actual witchcraft. It is quite interesting to see how ubiquitous the concept of the witch is, but we are still left with one question. How might we have collectively come to create such a specific creature? One explanation may lie in our tendency to over-imitate. Experiments demonstrating this often place a human child in front of a simple puzzle box, and are shown several steps to opening the box. However, the first few steps in this process are redundant, and in no way facilitate the opening of the box. Children will then proceed to follow the redundant steps unswervingly, despite the obvious disconnection. Chimps, on the other hand, will completely skip the redundant steps and continue straight to opening the box. This over-imitation demonstrates our tendency to assume that immaterial factors play a role in the outcome of a material event, and indeed, these steps prior to opening the box could be considered a form of ritual. If we expand this type of associative capacity to things like performing a dance before a much-needed rainstorm, or sacrificing animals to appease some spirit, it is then not too much of a stretch to see where the concept of magic, and thus witches, arose. And thus it is with the shared psychology that human beings have come to conceive of and promote the concept of a witch. With such a wide and seemingly endless cultural history, one would be hard-pressed to claim that the witch is a simple artifact of human culture. From the ancient beliefs of the past to the modern religions of the present day, the witch is certainly something we will not see fade into memory anytime soon. Although witches are entirely human, they are set apart by their magical powers, the nature of which is quite difficult to define and justify existing in the natural world. As such, we are then compelled to explain this curious and strangest aspect of the witch and her abilities. A moment needs to be taken to address that the following justification is completely outrageous and bears no resemblance to reality whatsoever. This is without a doubt going to completely shatter the realms of possibility and should be considered nothing less than fantastical, such as the inherent impossibility of magic. Magic takes many forms. It seems to defy the laws of physics, alter reality, and render matter and energy from nothing. Indeed, with such a wide gamut of possibilities, there seems to be a very little commonality upon which we can draw. However, this is deceptive. All of these aspects of magic share one essential factor: the inexplicable appearance and manipulation of energy without any particular determinable source. Initially, we looked at the famous equation, E equals mc squared, in order to demonstrate that mass and energy are one and the same. Although mass clearly represents an inordinate amount of energy, 1 gram is approximately 90 billion joules of energy, we can nevertheless accept their interchangeability with this most essential of concepts. Consequently, we are able to cover the entire range of abilities that witches seem to possess. Everything from raising the dead to rendering storms, all can be tied together in this manner. Of course, there are details that are being glossed over in this consideration. Assuming we are to turn a frog into a man, we would have to use approximately 25 gigawatts of energy for every gram we add or subtract from his mass. To put this into a more understandable perspective, this is the same energy consumption of approximately 20 million homes over the course of a year. Certainly this seems quite unreasonable. The next problem we face is the origin of this energy and its conduction. Considering the massive scale of energy that is being consumed in what we consider to be everyday witchcraft, we cannot reasonably expect energy to come from the witch herself. Rather, it is better to assume that the witch is conducting the energy from some greater source. Quite fitting considering the religious connotations often affixed to witches' belief system, namely their magic comes from a higher power. Considering that the energy involved in magic is external, we can then turn to relatively fringe aspects of science to justify this access to energy. Spooky action at a distance is a term given by Einstein to describe the effects of quantum entanglement. Although quantum entanglement was considered to be an odd side effect of special relativity, we have subsequently discovered that we are able to communicate information, and thereby do work, by taking advantage of this natural phenomenon. Therefore, an individual who, via quantum entanglement, has access to the energy reserves of, for example, a star or other massive heavenly body, might be able to manipulate the energy from that body as they see fit. Indeed, if they are able to make use of quantum artifacts such as wormholes to transfer mass, their energy requirements for their magic would be significantly reduced. In this conception, we can see the witch acting as a fulcrum, balancing and moving energy around from one place to another, rather than generating energy by sheer force of will. This concept is presented in the Tiffany story arc of Terry Pratchett's Discworld novels, and is beautifully rendered at one point in the story where Tiffany moves the heat generated by a nearby fire to save a group of sheep trapped by snow. As can be seen, magic is quite impossible in the traditional all-purpose sense. However, science fiction does sometimes present us with specific examples of magic, like activities that might be more possible despite their fantastic nature. Thus, it is perhaps more useful to look to technology and science to render magic. As the saying goes, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. The most striking abilities of witches are quite impossible. This is at once reassuring and disheartening. For although we no longer risk facing such incredible danger, We do face the fact that our fantasies are rather limited. We can at least take solace in the fact that every day we make use of near magical instruments and look forward to what our future might bring.